Hey Collective, it's Alan coming to you with another video that will be accompanying a post I'm releasing on LinkedIn, which specifically surrounds a topic that has been kind of growing over time. It actually is going to be a completion to a 3-arc series that I did not know I was going to be tapping into. When 2 posts ago I had awakened and shared with you guys a vision I had had in a dream where I had awakened in a field of flowers and kind of the spiritual significance behind that. But as time went on and as we approached the Easter holiday, I started to realize there was a lot more subtext and a lot more ground to cover. And it almost felt like there was a bunch of timelines kind of colliding off of the one image. And so this particular piece will be accompanying a post on LinkedIn that kind of surrounds the idea of the Beauty and the Beast ideology and how it kind of depicts a divine union type of situation and kind of the byproduct of what that kind of entailed from the initial piece. So to kind of set this up, let me just prepare you guys by saying that the quick recap is that I released a video on LinkedIn about a week ago that was called, I believe it's called, An Immortalized Garden of Souls in Bloom. And through that video, we had discussed the topic of healthy divine unions and the vision I had seen about certain souls now coming into union with one another and how they are in full bloom, and that when they come together, the divine masculine will be that of the embodiment of the great architect, and the divine feminine will be that of Sophia, the universal queen, if you will. And one of the things that I had noted in the initial video that we were exploring that did pretty well was the fact that there was symbolism that I could see within the flowers blooming, and specifically Miss Sophia had been immortalized in the imagery as a rose. And so from that, I had briefly mentioned the idea of Beauty and the Beast because it had been kind of in the collective consciousness. But I had noted that in that experience, when I was holding the image in my mind, I could see something out of the corner of my mind that actually depicted kind of the opposite of that, right? A divine union is when 2 souls are brought together in complete alignment with similar journeys and experiences, and they are meant to embody the divine will of the divine masculine and feminine and create something that's a legacy that will be phenomenal to the world at large. In a healthy dynamic. It's the evolution of souls who have done the work and have reached the destination at the gate and are now entering into their divine coupling. But in that initial video, you guys recall that I had also caught a glimpse of a toxic expression of that, where one of the parties I had glimpsed had not done the work and had now started to kind of try to hold the divine feminine back. And in the process, I had noted that I had gone into a small diatribe that I would then share a video of later, but that I didn't want to take away from the beauty of the actual experience of what I was depicting in the initial video. But what you guys on LinkedIn may not be aware of is I did go ahead and privately release a video that specifically spoke to that lower vibrational person who did not meet the requirements needed to then become coupled with his divine feminine. And she had decided that indeed she would say no to this particular person because he was not meeting her in the right vibration. And kind of the melee that he was having in his emotional outburst, that she was not upholding the spiritual contract, right? So it was a very high concept thing. But because it was speaking to a lower vibration, I didn't do a written form to it, feeling as though it would take away from the beauty of what we had said in the written piece over on LinkedIn. So, but for those of you who are interested, there is a post, and I think I called it Surrounding Divine Unions in Twin Flames and the Toxicity of What Happens When One or Both Parties Do Not Meet in Proper Alignment, right? So what I failed to realize at the moment is I was touching back onto the idea behind the Beauty and the Beast archetypes. And what I mean by that is, spiritually speaking, the way that a lot of us register information is through depiction of images or things that our brain can actually process, and that we can find meaning from it in a subliminal sense, and then bring it from the subconscious mind into the full conscious awareness, and it helps us understand greater spiritual principles that we can then share with other people within the academy. And one of the things that we specifically, for those of you who've been following me for a minute, have been working on is the idea that I really believe that we are in an academy and that we are here to evolve, and that there are beings that are now being tapped to be either teacher's assistants or are now moving on to the master's program, and that part of that will be coming into union sometimes with their divine counterparts, twin flames. So as we were exploring that, what I neglected to realize was the subplots were coming together almost like different timelines. They were all colliding from that one initial dream that I had had. And it was like the dream that never stopped giving. It was like a fruitful tree that just kept going. But when I was reviewing the information for this particular piece, what I realized is that the archetypes that I had been unknowingly tapping into was that the initial divine feminine who had reached the garden and was going to get her reward season was actually the character of Belle, who had done her own homework and had done everything she did. And I realized that her being in her divine power was her arriving at the gate as Belle, ready to meet the beast. But that the person that I had picked up on, sorry, my hair's in my face, that the person had picked up on that was at the lower vibration who had not done the work but was trying to be entitled, pompous, and arrogant was the Gustan archetype. And that there was actually people within our collective who are exhibiting that behavior right now, and that I needed to address it. But when I was done addressing it, what happened was I went to work and I had 2 doubles over the Easter weekend and I was exhausted. But something was not sitting well with me, and I realized what it was is that I had made mention at the end of the second video that was only on YouTube, that I had made note that I meant no ill will towards the person. I wasn't judging the Gaston character or whoever the real life person that's exhibiting that behavior. I wasn't judging them. And that I really believed that they could still get back on their horse and that they would be able to go on and maybe meet their right aligned person later down the road when they had done the work. What I failed to notice is the fact that I hadn't really spoken to the beast character. And what I really wanted to do with this is kind of reiterate something that happens to people in general. Because in the story of Beauty and the Beast, one of the spiritual principles that it really explores is the fact that the beast is actually cursed by an enchantress who is sent by the divine in order to test his character as a prince before he would become king. And the king, being so arrogant and elitist and all of the other stuff, sneers at the enchantress, who is then reveals herself to be who she really was, and then is cursed by her until the moment where he could humble himself and become the king that he needed to be and fall in love, etc., etc. If he failed to do it, that he would be stuck as the beast forever. Indicative of the shadow nature that we all have to work through in the academy, right? It's overcoming our shadow, like egoish pride and all of those lower vibrational things that he needed to work on, only it was encapsulated in a fairy tale. And I hadn't really spoken to the journey of what he endured and what he went through, right? Because in spirituality, we understand that there is karma. And when karma attaches itself to people, it's usually because of things that they decide to do. It's their own choices. It's free will choices that we partake in. And in the story of Beauty and the Beast, one of the things that we find is that as a prince, he was very arrogant and very, very egoish. And he was not in right alignment to then rule a kingdom. And so, karmically speaking, the enchantress represents the karma courts, releasing karma upon him in order for him to have to face a shadow, creating what's called a tower moment. So for those of you who aren't very spiritual, a tower moment specifically speaks to shaking the foundation of someone's life to the core in order to make them grow and prosper. It's usually not a very pleasant experience and can sometimes trigger what's called a dark night of the soul. And a dark night of the soul is a very popular way of saying that a soul is then brought before the karmic courts, and in order to get them into proper alignment for whatever their soul's mission is, they go through a forsaken period where they feel victimized, persecuted, and like they feel isolated and alone. And they feel like the great architect himself has damned them. And during that process, they have to face their shadow. And no matter what they do, they can't escape it. In fact, it's a curse until they can convert the lessons that are a part of that process into blessings. And what I wanted to do with this particular piece is end the written form with that particular question, which was, can we really say that the enchantress cursed him, or can we say that she actually blessed him in love? Because had he not gone through that tower moment, he could never have met Belle at her vibration. It would never have happened. She would have found him arrogant, egoish, and he would have lost the love of his life. So can we then see that sometimes in divine orchestration, what we feel is a hurdle or an obstacle is actually a blessing in disguise? And can we see that in the fairy tale, the enchantress actually is blessing him by even taking the time to make him face himself, because had he not done that, he would never have met the love of his life, and he would have been cursed literally for the rest of his life by his own actions. He would never have grown as a soul. So the point to this piece specifically wanted to focus on when we in the collective face obstacles and have hardships or trials and tribulations, that a lot of times while we're in it, it's so harsh to us that we don't realize that we will be blessed the moment we learn the lesson and stop acting in that toxic behavior. And one of the things that I found interesting about the Beauty and the Beast and how it was kind of correlating to all of what I had been speaking to in the previous post was how clearly it defined something ahead of its time, right? Beauty and the Beast was written a very long time ago, but it dealt with very, very spiritual principles that we as a collective now look at and fully register and understand and can look back and appreciate in a more in-depth approach, right? But it does kind of depict to us as leaders and conscious beings and so forth, the idea that sometimes your greatest hurdles and greatest obstacles are actually preventing you from going down a dangerous path that can really, really hurt you in some way, shape, or form. Or more to the point, if you're in a leadership role, stop you from being heartless in how you rule over your empire, right? Because one of the things that we notice when Belle arrives is that she's already at the queenship. She's already being crowned. She's at the gate when she meets him. She studies, she's on, she's gorgeous. And she's already overcome Gustan, who is kind of poisonous and kind of toxic and very lower vibrational, who wants to take ownership of her. So as she arrived at the gate to the actual kingdom where the beast is, she's already in search of her freedom. She's actually about to be liberated, though she doesn't know that because she feels like she's being trapped into replacing her father. Which again goes back to the initial post I had done where I had said that the divine feminine that I was picking up on had reached the gates not only carrying her cross, but also Gustan's cross. And what I neglected to realize in Beauty and the Beast is she also was carrying her father's cross. And so she had that burden upon her, and it made her feel trapped. And she actually ended up in the jail of the beast. But one of the things that happened is because of where she was at, and because of everything she had overcome, she was able to see through the facade of the lion, of the beast himself, to his heart. And had she not gone through all of the trials and tribulations that had she gone through, the moral and ethical question, or I should say the spiritual question, is would she have been in alignment to break him free at all, or would she not have been able to meet him at the right vibration? Because it's her choices and the way that she interacts with him which starts to break down his walls. And within that, it's immortalized in something that we had spoken to in the first piece, when I had spoken to the idea that in a divine union, when it is in full representation of the great architect and Miss Sophia, that the theory was that the great architect fell in love with Miss Sophia, immortalized by a rose, which is also seen in Beauty and the Beast, that falls in love with her because she challenges him and she reveals the shadow nature to him, bringing more and more light into his existence to such a degree that it breaks down every wall that he has, and he falls madly in love with her. And it actually, what we believe, is then creates the universe for her to play in, making her the queen of the universe. And we had explored that topic, only we had never really realized that within the halls of our academy are beaming examples of storylines and fables that explore the process by which that can happen in a much more romanticized expression, right? We had overlooked the fact that there were a lot of spiritual principles that are depicted through storylines of such type of authorship, right? And so as I was looking at the piece from a much higher perspective, I realized that one of the things that we had also missed is the relevance of the enchantress, the fourth archetype, right? Technically there are 5 archetypes because the father is in there, but for the point of the romance and the divine unions, we're going to stay to the 4 main archetypes. Because one of the things that I realized in looking at the enchantress is that she kind of falls into what most of us who are spiritual might consider the angel category. Meaning that we can tell from the storyline of this particular growth pattern and this evolution of soul to get him into right alignment, that somehow the great architect or the divine universe, whatever you want to call it, became aware of his reputation and realized that in order for him to rule over an entire kingdom, that he could not do it heartlessly. He had to do it with humility, kindness, and compassion, everything he wasn't. But one of the things about that is you can look at it from a higher perspective looking down, but people can hide the true nature to who they are. So sometimes, like I'd said to you guys before in other posts, you have to sometimes be cognizant that sometimes the teachers are dressed as students in order to test if someone's ready for their true abundant cycle. And in this situation with the king, he was about to be crowned king of his particular kingdom. He was about to inherit the keys to that castle, if you will. But he wasn't ready for it. He could not have ruled fairly, and he would have destroyed everything that was built there. And so the great architect, or the universe, whatever you believe in, sends the enchantress undercover to meet him and see the truth of him. And in the process is revealed that exactly what the rumors were actually true, and she curses him. But one of the interesting things that left me with is this idea of the teachers who address the students somehow being the karmic courts themselves, when in reality, the higher perspective is that they're not acting on their own behalf. They're being sent before certain individuals who are in the testing phase of their spiritual graduation, whether they're going on to the collegiate years, when they're in pursuit of mastery, or whether they're going on to graduate school. We all have come to understand that spiritually speaking, we are tested. But when people are about to be really, really blessed, one of the things that we as a collective have noted, even if we're not spiritual and are atheists, is that there are things that happen that are obstacles or things that we must overcome in order to truly reach our successes. And it isn't until we succeed in them that somehow a miracle happens, a door opens, and all our dreams come true. But in this particular situation, we can see that even ahead of its time, it was speaking to the spiritual principle of the universe always testing people before it hands them the keys to their own kingdoms, because they want to ensure that the person is in proper alignment to be able to hold the blessing and to not destroy it, right? You don't want to give somebody billions of dollars who cannot budget. You don't want to make somebody who's a complete addict to whatever it is somehow the industry leader for a great new concept that is of a divine origin, right? You don't want to hand people things like that. But that doesn't mean that the person isn't working very hard on who they are. And so you have to sometimes realize that sometimes you can love the work or the product of a person, but the person themselves should not be the one holding the only keys to the kingdom. And so the story follows the idea of the teachers or mentors or spiritual guides, angels, archangels, whatever you believe in, serving as the testing vehicle undercover to truly test whether someone is worthy of their own kingship or queenship, right? Because if you're about to bless somebody also with a divine union, where you are basically pairing two people together that are meant to be at the same vibration, you have to know for sure that they are actually who they say they are, so as to not tank the other person who has already been vetted very clearly. But one of the things that was interesting about the Beauty and the Beast storyline is that we really never get to see what happens to that enchantress, right? All we see is that she comes across as toothless and homeless and all this stuff. And we realize that the king sneers at her and does all this stuff and kind of proves the point that he was not worthy at that time. But notice that even though he wasn't worthy at that time and was cursed, she blesses him with the journey to actualize himself, to be actually at the right vibration, to finally receive the blessings when he's learned what he needed to learn. And kind of the wonderful symbolism that is exhibited through that type of storyline and that story arc. So when I was looking at the entirety of everything that I had downloaded, starting with that initial piece that was written, I think, that I had written to last week, that I posted on LinkedIn, one of the things that we had started with was that I was at an actual garden festivity where it was a ceremony where the divine feminine was being coordinated, and I had equated it to Gaia because that's the name I had heard. But one of the things that I had caught my attention as I was working through the rest of these subplots, these additional timelines, was that I realized something specifically about Miss Sophia that I had overlooked, which was, what if Miss Sophia was the enchantress? Meaning that there are teachers and people within the academy, angels and so forth, who are coming into their blessing season. And it may look different than others, right? Because there are hierarchies that we believe exist within not only our 3D reality, but actually are believed to exist in the higher realms, mid-heaven, second heaven, and so forth. And so we understand that there are people who are crowned, let's say, queens and kings, and then some who become emperors and empresses, right? Who actually inherit empires. And I was starting to wonder who would be the Sophia type character in the Beauty of the Beast storyline, and I realized that it was the enchantress herself who accomplished her mission. Because see, the thing about our current day wording, I should say, is that instead of saying enchantress, we would say things like high priestess or hierophant, right? People who work under a divine mission and purpose in life, who, whether they know it or not, are actual testing vehicles for other people, right? Because some people within the academy have favor, right? Whether you're religious or not religious, you kind of get the idea that some people have a spiritual favor. You can tell by their skill sets, you can tell by the way that they carry themselves and the product and what they produce into the world, what is their content creation. You can see that they have skill sets that are not common. But the people can sometimes be very jealous of that. So one of the things that we as spiritualists kind of come to realize is that you never judge another human being because you never know who that being is. And clearly in Beauty and the Beast, that was a lesson that the Beast needed to learn before he became king. Because as we met her in the story, she was dressed as a hag. And what was interesting about the experience is that the reason this even popped into my head, because I was so stressed with having, I did I think it was like 25 hours in 2 days of work. So I was kind of really tired. But in the process of doing, actually more than that, I did like 34 hours in 2 days. And so one of the things that was interesting is that I had one of the ladies that comes to our particular location doesn't look like she's a well-to-do person. In fact, she looks like she's an elder lady who's almost like a bag lady, but who I just think the world of. I think she's great, and she's always there. And I kind of looked at her, and I wondered how many people judged her on her appearance, never giving her the opportunity to actually speak to her and engage with her in a way that was higher vibrational. And I found it very interesting that it was in talking to her where I suddenly focused my attention on what the enchantress would be like in real world situations and what those tests might look like for each of us. So to that end, what I wanted to say with this particular post, as we close out what I believe to be the 3-part story arc to this particular divine union, twin flame type of dynamic, is that whether or not you fall into the category of a spiritual adept, or if you somehow are someone who comes across with a skill set that is of a divine origin, understand that not everybody always means you well. So sometimes you may find yourself with people overlooking you for a reason. And it's actually a sense of protection that we in the spiritual community have come to understand as a cloak that protects you from the judgment of other people. So again, where the beast is feeling punished because of his own failure to man up and to rise to the occasion of the vibration that he needed to be at in order to get the keys to the kingdom. Remember, he started off as a prince when this was happening. In order to make him king, he had a tower moment that then brought him into full maturation where he then could fall in love with Belle, who was already there. So that was the twin flame divine union type of dynamic where he needed to do the work and she needed to be the key to do it. But the same is true for the enchantress, who may feel as though she's overlooked or somehow made fun of or somehow humiliated or somehow always feeling like she has to be a little bit more on guard, or he, because it could be either way, hierophant or high priestess, whatever the wording is. But what was interesting is that that person may feel as though that they are somehow being neglected or not being protected. And the message that came through was very clear. Just because it's not your time yet doesn't mean that you're not being prepared for your table. That your table is already set, but you still have things and responsibilities that you need to take care of on your own journey. And some of it has to do with testing other people, and the byproduct of kind of the backlash can come when you unknowingly are serving the divine will in a way where you may not even be conscious that your interactions with other people is a methodology by which the divine great architect or the divine feminine can see directly at someone because of the way that they treat you and they can gauge you, right? But sometimes you don't let the people know that this is true for, that that's the case, right? Because that would make them feel awkward and it would change their timeline. It would make them feel like they are somehow responsible for the karma being pushed onto everyone else. Because I couldn't help but look at the enchantress in the scenario and realize that the beast would have had a negative reaction, and which is what happened, and blaming the enchantress for the bad karma that befell him, even though it was his own choices to be that person, and he brought it on himself. So imagine what would have been like for the enchantress, who's looking at him going, I didn't force your hand. You did this. And now the karmic courts are handing you karma based on what you did with me. but don't come back at me on it. And it was something that we had been exploring in spiritual circles lately, about the fact that there are people within the collective who get very jealous or they get very angry at the wrong people, right? People who are blessed, whether they are the bells of the ball or whether they are the beast who finally breaks free of the shadow nature and becomes enlightened, those beings do the work, right? And one of the cautions we're told in Beauty and the Beast with the Guston character, I think that's his name, is he doesn't do the work. He doesn't love Belle. He just wants the rewards. He wants to own her because he finds her beautiful, or he finds whatever it is, right? Because in the initial story for the first video, I had made it very clear that what caught my attention is that he didn't want her until he saw that she was about to be blessed by the divine directly. And he could see that she was being given a bunch of money or some sort of opportunity, or a door was about to open, and he wanted in on those residuals. He didn't care about her. And so you see the dynamic that plays out in each of the storylines, right? Because one of the things that we in the spiritual community are finding is that people respond negatively to people who do well in schoolwork, right? We knew this from high school. We knew, like, if you got straight A's, you were made fun of or whatnot. I mean, most people didn't fuck with me, but what I'm saying is, like, but I also dropped out, you know what I mean? Like I had my own issues and my own stuff going on. But we remember what it was like to be in the school dynamic and how people can sometimes become jealous over the simplest things when in actuality the only difference between you and them is that you went home and did the homework. It's the same principle spiritually, right? And so one of the things that I was to specifically speak to those of you who this makes sense to, is understand that people don't always wish you well, but that you don't have to carry the burden of somehow feeling like you are responsible for their bad karma. You're not doing anything manipulative. You're not doing anything unethical. You're just being you. And if the divine happened to have tapped you on the shoulder to be one of his chosen ones, that is completely out of your hands what happens to other people as they interact with you. That is their decision-making process. That is not your responsibility. But when I was done looking at all of it, one of the things that I found fascinating was that, remember that I was in the kingdom, I was actually in the chapel during the ceremony of the Divine Feminine, and I could feel my partner directly next to me. And I started to realize that this particular dream had so many different timelines because there's so many variables of the people who are actually coming into right alignment with each other. And that one of the things I found most interesting is that sometimes someone else's misstep where they didn't get to be where, like in the initial story, Guston didn't do the homework so he couldn't be with Belle, also produced Guston's possibility to really ascend even higher because he learned the harsh lesson of having lost the one and only Belle. And so sometimes when you feel like you have really screwed something up, it can lead to your biggest victory. And that's one of the things about the divine union twin flame dynamic that is a healthier aspect to it. Just because you fall short of the initial person that you were supposed to be with, that doesn't mean that you're going to be cursed, because the curse itself was the blessing, right? Let's say that the beast was scheduled to be with the enchantress. He couldn't. There's just no way. He couldn't see beyond the teeth. He couldn't see beyond whatever the imagery was, whatever his bias was about her. So that was an automatic, never going to happen, right, situation. But because of that interaction, he got the one and only Belle. Not only a Belle, but the belle of the ball. Someone who releases him of all his darkness and somehow breaks through the shadow nature of his behavior. Brings him down into humility, makes him understand that you don't own other people. All of that came about because he failed the first test. One of the things that I've noticed specifically about spirituality, and for those of you who are conscious leaders or industry leaders or empire creators or actors or people who have a lot of money, is that you fail a lot. You get rejected a lot. And it is in how you pick yourself up and carry yourself forward where you are most blessed along the journey of life. So when we look within the academy at different things, whether it's fables, whether it's gospel, whether it's literature, whether it's Homer and the Iliad, whatever your focal point is, there is always wisdom to be gained and gleaned from reviewing something that can look almost superfluous to the outside observer. But if it's in the academy, what I'm basically saying to you is don't ever take it for granted to not have some sort of purpose or meaning. And if you have time, sometimes revisiting something that you've seen over and over again with a fresh pair of eyes can sometimes help you grow and prosper much more quickly. And here's what I mean. So in Beauty and the Beast, we see the negative results for Gaston, right? He ends up trying to destroy her and tries to kill the beast and ends up getting killed himself. He destroys himself and acts like an ass the whole nine. But we also see what happens when the prince himself fails his own test and the consequences of what that means and what he's forced to endure and has to confront. But in the storyline, a more evolved expression of that same Beauty and the Beast principle, we look to the movie Ever After, where the prince in question does pass the test. Remember, in Beauty and the Beast, it's the enchantress, it's a divine feminine who tests the prince and he fails. But in Ever After, it's Leonardo da Vinci who tests the prince and says, if you can't see past the labels and you can't see the value to her, you don't deserve her. So notice how it's an evolution of each storyline, each one produced from the same tale as old as time, right? It's the quest for the ultimate holy grail. It's the epitome of love actualized from the great architect's masculine to the great architect's divine feminine quality, and the beauty that lay within the journey of a well-aligned coupling that comes together. But notice that within our particular collective, within the academy, there are all these stories about love, like Romeo and Juliet, where it doesn't work out and they both commit suicide. You know, see what I'm saying? There's so much to glean and learn if you revisit something that you may have only watched or read in school. I can't tell you how many times I've enjoyed rereading Alice in Wonderland, not just because my name is Al and I'm always in Wonderland, but because of the fact that I find it very interesting, some of the metaphors that you find when you read something over and over again, using different perspectives and different lenses, because each lens, if you really understand the Great Earth Academy, is a different human being. It's a different person that you might actually run across. And if you're not aware of how that storyline is playing out, you may miss something that is incredibly important to your reward season, or that can be a test that you could have easily passed had you just been more aware of what it is that you were looking at. And sometimes the best way to do it, which is what I've been saying over and over again, is by looking at the past and looking at elders and masters who have come before you and where they have tripped up and where they have won in order to find the breadcrumbs that you will need in order to succeed along your own journeys. So in regards to the divine unions, what I will say is by the time that I was done looking at everything very clearly and kind of redefining my own perspective, I had now come to a position where I had looked at the story arc for the divine unions and specifically the twin flames from 6 different perspectives, like a lotus flower that was blooming. And it seems like it might continue to grow. But notice that all that changes is just outcome and decisions, right? And one of the things that it trains us as leaders is it trains us in being able to look at things from multiple perspectives on a daily basis. Because though it seems trivial, our not trying to make a point or are not trying for a specific outcome allows our skill sets to develop more quickly because you're not trying for something specific. There's no assumption for profit. There's no goal that you are after. Instead, you are just using your leisurely time to review something that might mean something to you now or that might prove important to you later down the road. But usually when it's kind of fable or somehow imaginative or creative, it opens your brain and your imagination to receive data in a much more rewarding experience, right? Notice that all of this began by my awakening in a garden, and I couldn't quite at first figure out if the flowers I was looking at was in like a bouquet being handed to me because it was so close to my eyes when I opened and when I awakened in it, or if I was in a garden. But it wasn't until I started to focus directly on the flowers that I started to see that the faces that were at the top of the stems were of great leaders, spiritualists, humanitarians, Aristotle, like all of these amazing energies that actually existed within our academy that were immortalized in this beautiful garden of Eden, if you will, because of the legacies that they had left. And the word legacy specifically spoke to me as I was reviewing this Beauty and the Beast subplot to the idea of the twin flame, right? Because it's an immortalized expression that has survived time for whatever reason. And we're starting to find that things that leave a legacy with such a trajectory, with such an impact, might have a greater importance to our expression of life, right? Because for the longest time, though these things were approached and kind of touched on in a imaginative, creative way, it wasn't really understood until this generation blossomed into their spiritual prowess, where they are beginning to awaken to the idea that there's more to the world than just dogma. And in that process, a lot of what was written or that was created by Michelangelo, by Da Vinci, by all of the great artists, is now requiring us as a collective to work together to revisit, because we're finding that there are subplots within the pieces themselves, which is why next week I really want to do a love letter to Michelangelo. I'm supposed to do it this week, but this dream just keeps on giving. Like timelines and different ideas and stuff were all sprouting out from the one dream because of the complexity to what I was watching. But when I was looking at preparing this particular video and writing something so kind of open-ended for this third and final installment to the arc of these 3 videos, I realized that it is in the journey of learning where you and I most cross paths with each other and can most relate, right? Because even if we disagree on an outcome or in a perspective, it's the pursuit of the quest. It's in the journey where we cross paths and can relate and can kind of be brothers and sisters. Whether we agree or disagree to a specific outcome, the truth is that as long as we're on the journey, we kind of appreciate each other's opinion on stuff, because it opens the doorways for us to see the world in different ways that can not only benefit us, but our daughters and our sons, and kind of bring the collective consciousness up. But notice it's based a lot on breadcrumbs already laid for us by people who seem to have a legacy that predates them, or that I should say that outlives them. Because like if you look at Nostradamus and some of the things that they wrote about, they wrote to the future. And it's one of those more complex things that we as humans and living in this era kind of go, well, how did they know these events were going to happen? And a lot of people believe it's astrological. That's why I pay attention to Palmer and like other people within the community. And then there's like sacred imagery and symbolism that we across with sacred geometry. And we start to kind of question the environment around us, not to break other people's foundation down, not where we're trying to convince someone else to change who they are, but instead to just be our authentic selves and realize that there's a lot more help available to us within this great Earth Academy. I mean, when it was all said and done, why create a learning vessel this prestigious and so amazing, if not to help the students within it evolve? And one of the great things about learning as a general rule is that when you learn and acquire knowledge, you can speak to other people from different perspectives that help them kind of understand some things that may be a little bit more complex. So take the initial vision that I had about the dream where I was literally within the castle walls of the great architect and the Divine Mother, and they were at a coronation for something very sacred that had a lot of spiritual principle. Well, you can't really say that to someone who's not at the same grade level that you are spiritually, or that maybe comes from a different house, right? Because everybody looks at things from whatever their vibration is, right? So, but you can speak to it through imagery like the rose and a vase, and how that elicits the idea of Beauty and the Beast. And by studying the archetypes and the storylines of the choices they make, you can still parlay the exact same information that a spiritualist would say in different wording, only you release it to a wider audience in a way that they can grasp it without talking down to anybody. And that's an incredibly rewarding experience. So for those of you who are following all of this and find it interesting, what I would say is sometimes one of the greatest blessings you can have is your own children, because you read stories to your children. So what I recommend next time is, just for shits and giggles, why not read one of your favorite stories that you used to read to your kids, only now look at it from the perspective of a spiritual lens, or look at it from the subtext of what was the author trying to convey and what is the moral or ethical question. Right? Like, what is the purpose behind Ferdinand the Bull, and why is he always under the tree looking at daisies? What is the relevance of that creative spark? Or what was J.K. Rowling really trying to instill in us with the imaginative quality of imagination and magic, and kind of that idea of why we stop believing in such things, right? Because a miracle is magic. It's just a different wording system. But all of this comes from the imagination. And with so many people now becoming kind of entrapped into a narrative media driven, that's kind of like just movies where they don't read, you're being fed outcomes and information that sometimes keep you kind of trapped to a box that you can't break free of until you start to actually explore your own interpretation of things where it's not being fed to you. So what I would recommend for those of you who are fully grasping the relevance to all of this and why I wanted to share any of this with you, I would say take the opportunity to revisit some of the things that you may have thought that you really enjoyed in the past and look at it from a different perspective that you may not have gained. For example, how many of you, before I said it, even thought about the enchantress? How many of you thought about the fact that did she really curse him, or had she actually blessed him by making him face his shadow? Because if she had not cursed him, then he could never have met Belle. It would never have worked out. He would have been Guston, which we already know what the outcome was. So when you revisit the world around you, especially these kind of fantasy things, and when you have these downloads and these mystical experiences or these dreams or visions that somehow have spiritual relevance, ask yourself if it's something that is relevant to other people that you won't bombard with, but that may open a doorway that makes them think of the world in a different way. Because in the end, what is the story of Beauty and the Beast? It's the pursuit of the ultimate love. It's the ever after dream. It's not a happy ending. It's a happy beginning into a very joyous reward season that they are then blessed. But very rarely do we then get to find out what happens to those stories, which is why they say, and they lived happily ever after. But when we evolve, we realize that that's not always the case. In fact, I can't remember what movie it was. I think it was Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Angelina Jolie makes the comment. She goes, a happy ending is just a story that has not ended fully. And I just thought that was really cynical, but kind of hysterical. So when you revisit stuff, though, look at the complexity of how some of the things didn't work out, and can you glean something of value to it that can then be instilled to your children, or that can somehow bring up enlightenment to other people in a way that doesn't bombard them with wording that they don't understand. One of my greatest pet peeves, and this is where I'm going to end it, is sometimes I find that people speak down to other people. Not because they mean to, but because they don't really know how to correlate information from a higher vibration and ground it into the 3D experience. And so one of the things that this particular process has illuminated me on is that sometimes it's just about finding the right subject matter that says the same thing but in a creative way where the person is already exposed to the content and will better grasp what it is from a spiritual principle through what they already know. And how many more doors that will open for us. In the end, what I was left feeling with, I was wondering if we approached more things in our world through this type of behavior, where we didn't think just in our own wording, but actually thought about it from a much more collective consciousness scale, how much more breakthroughs we would have, and how less deadlocks we would have with other people, right? Because when people speak to each other in their own wording from their own agendas, it builds walls. Whereas if you speak to people in a creative way, it breaks the walls down, which of course can then bring problems from people who like chaos and so forth, but that's not really relevant to the situation. So for those of you who related to the Belle character, just know that sometimes you might have to wait for the Beast to catch up to you. And that's fine. Notice that his behavior wasn't aimed at her, whereas Guston, who failed from the very beginning, literally was trying to own her, and so she immediately got away from him. So understand the toxicity versus what you're waiting for, right? Someone who's working on their shadow and is being forced to catch up to you is not the same thing as someone whose shadow is trying to hurt you. So that's one lesson. 2, understand for the Guston character that I don't care how emotional you get or how lower vibrational you are by nature. Understand that lashing out at the person who did the homework that you wouldn't do is really shitty, and it's not really recommendable, because as you can see, you end up paying even more costs and you don't get the happy ending you wanted. But if you can do what the Beast did, if Guston had decided to grow up and to not act like an ass, then he would have had the journey of the Beast and may have been able to come back to his own version of Belle later. And then there's the beast himself, who, of course, learned from his lessons and was still blessed, even though he thought he was cursed, right? It's the conversion rate between a lesson becoming a blessing. Because in the end, what did he get? He got his keys to his kingdom. And not only that, but he met his would-be wife. And if they followed the trajectory that they would be on as they evolve, they would then one day become emperors and empresses themselves of an empire, as opposed to just a kingdom. Small steps, right? And then for the enchantresses out there, for the high priest and the hierophants. Okay. Other people's opinions of you is kind of irrelevant, but understand sometimes that you are maybe overlooked or people think of you as weird or whatever, not necessarily because they dislike you, but because it's intentional. Sometimes the great architect will protect his chosen people specifically for the fact that he doesn't want anybody fucking with them. And one of the things that ends up happening is that sometimes the people can feel a little neglected or overlooked by society. But in truth, it's again it's a perfect tower moment for you, because one day that will change. And so suddenly where your anonymity was everything you had and you were craving the light, suddenly you won't be able to escape the light. So understand pacing and divine timing all the way across, and understand that no matter which archetype you fall under, understand that there is importance to taking the time to really assess from multiple perspectives what it is that you're enduring or what you're going through, and kind of what might be the benefits to why it's happening to you, right? Somebody who becomes a big addict to alcohol or whatever it is, and who starts to lose his job or her job and things starts to deteriorate, may have a tower moment that stops them from getting into a car, right? They may not be able to afford the car, and they think that they're forsaking, but the truth is that it stopped them from getting behind the wheel and killing a family of 4 down the road. You see what I'm saying? So when bad stuff happens to us, no matter which timeline you're on, take a moment to realize that sometimes a curse is your greatest blessing. Because every successful person on planet Earth will tell you the same thing. It was in their failures that perfected their journey. It was how they became masters. It wasn't an easy journey. Nothing was handed to most people. And if it was handed to them, then they had really good karma because of how they carried themselves previously. But for those of you who have to work, understand that that's why we're in the academy. Can you imagine how boring it would be to endure everything going on the collective scale and everything that we're witnessing and then not be growing? Can you imagine like just being stuck in this situation? There are rewards to the journey, but sometimes the rewards come at the sacrifice of everything you've had to overcome in order to get you where you are. Because until you reach that level of mastery, you may not be able to serve your life purpose, right? In the end, the enchantress was serving a purpose on behalf of a divine order. She was testing the people that she was encountering in order to make sure that any blessings due onto them would be well received and actually cherished and not just thrown away. That is divine mission that has a heavy cost to it if in wrong alignment. So imagine how much preparation that particular soul has had to go through in order to succeed on those type of experiences, right? Because there are people within our collective who have assignments where they go to some of the darkest places. People that are, I always call them angels in disguise, that walk among society and serve like Mother Teresa did, or that walk around and deal with, there are drug addicts who overcome it in order to then teach people how to overcome it. You see what I'm saying? So always take the moment to be graceful about other people. You never know who's undercover or what it is that they're doing within the academy, and you don't know what the divine is trying to get them to actualize, right? And then for those of you coming into the divine unions, notice